We'll call this meeting of Lima City Council to order. We'll begin tonight's meeting with the invocation by Councilor Townsend, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Dear God, help us tonight be open to others' ideas and beliefs, to be respectful of our differences and not threatened by them, and help us grow in understanding of our own motives, knowing that people often act out of their own fears. May we be a force for replacing fear with insight that will help us all to be patient and kind as we talk. Real strength can always find compromise, so as we work together, we will find a common ground to see what is truly important and unites us, and while focusing on that, we banish the roadblocks of ego and fear. Tonight and all nights, may we be open to others' ideas and beliefs. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Nieper.
Here.
Mr. McLean.
Here.
Mr. Lowe.
Here.
Mr. Tevin.
Here.
Ms. Adams.
Here.
Mr. Glenn.
Here.
Ms. Townsend.
Here.
And Mr. Nixon.
Here. Are there any amendments to tonight's agenda?
Yes, Mr. President. I move that communication number 24 and resolution 1213 be added to tonight's agenda. Both are relative to the impediments to fair housing.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to amend tonight's agenda by adding communication number 24 and resolution 1213. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Resolution 1113.
Memorializing the late Larry Reed Skelly, outstanding Lima citizen, and extending condolences to his family on behalf of the Lima City Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin?
I move that Resolution 11-13 be passed on its first reading after having been read.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to pass Resolution 1113 on its first reading after having been read. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk read the resolution.
Whereas, on October 13th, 2013, the entire Lima Land community was saddened by the death of Larry Reed Skelly, whose many contributions have and will continue to affect the Lima Land community. And whereas, Larry was a member of the 1955 graduating class of South High School, where he served as the captain of the football team. Following graduation, he followed in his father's footsteps and started a 41-year career with Buckeye Pipeline Company. In 1996, he retired as manager of Everglades Pipeline Company. And whereas his dedication to the Lima community was evident by his involvement with the Boulevard Neighborhood Association, where he served as vice president for a number of years. And whereas Larry was a devoted husband, father, and grandfather, and he will be sorely missed by his family, friends, and his canine companion, Kylie. And whereas it is the opinion of this council that the many contributions of Larry Skelly should not go unrecognized. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Lima, Ohio, that the Lima City Council hereby acknowledges the many contributions of Larry Reed Skelly to the Lima community which have and will continue to benefit our citizens, and that the council on behalf of the entire community expresses its condolences to his family and friends.
Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin?
I was so saddened when I heard of Larry's death. When you're a city council person, there can be a lot of frustrations. There can be a lot of disappointment and apathy in a lot of the things that we deal with. But Larry was one of those individuals who made me so happy to be a city council person and to represent Larry. I would see Larry and his wife Barbara at the Boulevard Neighborhood Association meetings and always had wonderful conversations. Larry was so proud of the city of Lima and so interested in the city, and he really was so thoughtful in his suggestions to continue to make Lima better. Larry was one of those guys who did exactly that. He made Lima a better community just by being himself. And I appreciated it, and I learned a lot from Larry. And I appreciated him as a citizen who really did contribute. And I'm so glad, Barbara, that you and your son Mark are here this evening. I thought it was very appropriate that we recognize Larry for what he did for us and what we learned from him. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Is there any further discussion? I just want to say that I agree with everything that Tom said. Larry was, on top of being active and doing things and making suggestions, he was always very encouraging every time that you ran into him. Even though there might be some tough issues that we were dealing with, he was always encouraging, told us that no matter how tough it gets, we're still doing a good job, and that he appreciated the fact that we serve. And we appreciate everything he did for the city, for the neighborhood organization, and for the city. He will be missed. I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Resolution 1113 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Mrs. Skelly, if you'll come forward, I'll present you with the resolution.
I'd like to thank all of you. Larry would be so pleased, so proud.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no public hearings this evening. Privilege of the floor, Diane Peterson regarding the Square Fair Inc. project. Diane, if you come forward, give your name and address for the record. Council rules allow 3 minutes.
Diane Peterson Rogers, 150 Squire Lane.
Okay, I appreciate the opportunity to share with you a very exciting pilot project being presented by Square Fair Incorporated. Project Awareness, as we are calling it, is an effort to bring relevant and accessible public art for all to share. The time is right, the community is heading in a very positive direction, and art is a celebration of that fact. This project is being led by a dynamic group of motivated citizens with a long history of community participation. In this first pilot year, we are producing 2 very different works of art for the gallery that is downtown Lima. The first is a community mural. The mural of full-body portraits will be created by local artist Ruth Ann Sturgill and will be mounted on the south wall of Hofeller, Hyatt and Clark. Through a public announcement in November and word of mouth over the past month and a half, community members have come forward to submit persons past and present who have significantly impacted their lives and they deem worthy of inclusion in the project. No restrictions were placed, and all submissions have been accepted. The cost of each image is $600, which goes to the artist, and where the cost was prohibitive to some, we are working with them. This has been a very organic process, and the results speak to the core of what we value as a community. The content of the mural will be very rich and diverse. Honorees personify industry, education, entrepreneurship, medicine, pharmacy, law, social services, music, theater, sports, law enforcement, small and family business, the media, grocers, lawyers, doctors, actors, musicians, athletes. They are African American, Irish, Italian, German, Christian, Jewish, men and women from the late 19th century to the 21st century. They're natives and immigrants to our community. What they all have in common is a love for, a commitment to, and an investment in Lima, Allen County, Ohio. And this mural will be unveiled at a Toast to the City on August 7th. The second phase of Project Awareness is a beautiful large mosaic mural that will be installed on the north wall of 147 South Main Street. Thousands of small pieces of glass, clay, and other materials will be woven together to create a representation of our economic past, present, and future, interpreted through line, color, movement, texture, and light. The content of the mosaic is farming, oil, railroad, manufacturing, medical, education, great American strength. The final design will be unveiled during a toast to the city, with production to begin the following Monday, August 11th. Design and installation will be conducted and overseen by Tom Cullen, stained glass artist and muralist. The community will be invited to directly participate in the creation through workshops for area schools, families and businesses, service organizations, and other interested groups. The installation is scheduled to be completed by the end of October, and the mosaic mural will cost $35,000 and be paid for through a Toast to the City fundraising and tiered sponsorship opportunities. The entire process will be monitored both internally by the committee and participants, as well as externally by a social enterprise project team from the Ohio State University Fisher College of Business. These recommendations, along with evaluations from the people who implemented the project year one, will inform the review committee as a 5-year plan will be adopted in November of 2014. This plan will prioritize needs and opportunities as we move forward, and we ask that you join with us in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Consent calendar,
Mr. President,
Ms. Townsend?
I move that item A on the consent calendar be received, filed, and approved, and items B and C be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive, file, and approve item A and to receive and file items B and C. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 1.
From the Director of Utilities regarding legislation to advertise for bids for police department and courts building renovations.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 1 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 1. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 2.
From the Director of Utilities regarding legislation for a study of the Ottawa River permitting feasibility assessment.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 2 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 2. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 3.
From the Deputy Director of Utilities requesting legislation to pay the Ohio EPA annual discharge fee.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 3 be received and filed and authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 3 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 4.
From Chief Hefner regarding legislation to apply for the 2013 Assistance to Firefighters
Mr.
grant.
President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that communication number 4, receive and file legislation on the night agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 4. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 5.
From Chief Martin regarding legislation to enter into a contract with Reineke Mazda and Nissan for the purchase of a 2014 Ford Interceptor SUV.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that communication number 5, receive and file legislation on the night agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 5. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 6.
From Chief Martin requesting legislation to enter into a contract with Reineke Mazda and Nissan for the purchase of a 2014 Ford Focus.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that communication number 6, receive and file legislation on the night agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 6. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 7.
From Chief Martin regarding legislation to enter into an agreement with Lima City Board of Education.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that communication number 7, receive and file legislation on the night agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 7. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 8.
From the auditor attesting to the reasonableness of the revenues in the mayor's estimate.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 8 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 8. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 9.
From the mayor regarding the 2014 mayor's budget estimate.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 9 be received, filed, and referred to the City Council Finance Committee.
Second.
The motion and the second is that communication number 9 be received and filed and referred to City Council's Finance Committee. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 10.
From the mayor regarding legislation for the 2014 temporary appropriations.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 10 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 10. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 11.
From the Director of Human Resources regarding legislation to enter into a contract with Spirion for 2014.
Mr. President,
Ms. Townsend.
I move that communication number 11 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 11. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 12.
From Diane Peterson Rogers regarding a Square Fair Inc. project.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe.
I move that communication number 11 be received and filed.
Second.
Number 12 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 12. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 13.
From the Finance Director regarding legislation for budget amendments.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 13 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 13. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 14.
From the Finance Director regarding legislation for cash transfers.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 14 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 14. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 15.
From the Finance Director regarding legislation for cash advances.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 15 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 15. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 16.
From the Mayor regarding merit increases.
Mr. President,
Ms. Townsend.
I move that communication number 16 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 16. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
The motion carries. Communication number 17.
From the Director of Audit Services requesting legislation to enter into a contract with Harris ERP.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 17 be received and filed, and the law director authorized to prepare the necessary legislation.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 17 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 18.
From the Director of Public Works regarding legislation to amend the contract with Ward Construction Company.
Mr. President,
Mr. Nieper.
I move that communication number 18 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 18. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 19.
From the Director of Public Works regarding legislation to amend the contract with Bluffton Paving, Inc.
Mr. President,
Mr. Nieper.
I move that communication number 19 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 19. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 20.
From the Director of Public Works regarding legislation to enter into contractual service agreements for 2014.
Mr. President,
Mr. Nieper.
I move that communication number 20 be received and filed.
Second?
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 20. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
The motion carries. Communication number 21.
Change that vote here just a minute. From the Director of Audit Services regarding contract labor report.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin?
I move that communication number 21 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 21. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Communication number 22.
From the Law Director regarding legislation to continue legal services with Stephen P. Samuels.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 22 be received and filed.
Second?
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 22. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 23.
From the Law Director regarding the number of ordinance acted upon.
Mr. President,
Ms. Townsend.
I move that communication 23 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 23. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 24.
From the Director of Community Development requesting legislation for a resolution supporting Lime Allen County analysis of impediments to fair housing plan.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that communication number 24 be received and filed. Legislation in the form of a resolution is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 24. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Reports of officials, Mr. Saul Allen, leaf pickup. And probably
Mr. President, members of council, gave you in pre-council a copy of the leaf pickup report for 2013 and also a copy of the year-to-date snow removal sheet for 2013. And starting with the leaf pickup report, I'll just briefly go through that. Page 1 just gives you a cost for this year. Total cost just over $154,000, $154,429.23 to be exact. Page 2 gives a comparison over 5 years between previous years and this year's as far as total loads, total cubic yards, and equipment hours and total costs. As you can see, the amounts were up that we collected this year, almost in comparison to 2009. Page 3, I did want to include some pictures because I always laugh sometimes and tell you not in the street, not in the street. What you have on that first picture is a picture of leaves in the street. That these pictures were all taken during leaf pickup, and this is what we have to deal with. So, page 2 is a picture showing leaves in the street right near a catch basin. Issue here is that yes, they're not on the catch basin, but water cannot get to that catch basin.
Floods.
Page 3 is a picture of not only the leaves being in the street, but also a tarp being on top of the leaves, and also a bag being on top of the leaves. Once again, this is stuff that we actually have seen this year. And the final page, I really want to call to your attention because once again, leaves are in the street, and if you didn't know it, midway in this picture, there's actually a catch basin. So the leaves are covering the catch basin in this picture. So this is things we actually do deal with, and a lot of times, and I know we had a real bad storm on a Sunday where we had quite a bit of flooding, and this basically, 90% of it is just leaves on top of catch basins. So I do want to let you know, what we do face when we're out picking up leaves. So, second item, snow removal report, and this is hot off the presses as of 8:02 this morning, and I do want to divert your attention to the last one, number 15. This would be the storm we had beginning this past Friday through this morning, 6 inches of snow. We did use 338 tons of salt. Labor costs, which would be regular labor, of $1,260. Because this was mostly over the weekend, we did have high overtime costs, $11,710. And material costs, most of that is salt, some of that would be gas. For the total cost, just to remove snow for the past 3 days of almost $34,000. So, any questions? Thank you.
And information.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Next, under reports of officials, Tom Mazer. Good evening.
Good evening, and I want to wish everybody happy holidays, and then thank you for letting me come in here tonight and getting this off my plate. I promise I won't take the 30 minutes you promised me.
There were 3 minutes. You're always adding
3
zeros.
minutes, I'm sorry. What I'm passing out is just snippets of a document that we developed in cooperation with the City of Lima and other stakeholders. I want to thank Amy Odom and her staff, as well as Rhonda Eddy, the Allen County Auditor, who provided us a lot of data. The report is predicated on the need to submit information by the city and the county commissioners to the Department of Housing and Urban Development to necessarily underwrite the use of your community development block grant monies. Okay? The document itself is entitled the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice. This last year, we added a precept basically alluding to the fact that it's affirmatively furthering fair housing choice, which is a new push by the federal government. This is a federally mandated document that is required to be submitted to ensure continued eligibility in the programs, and of course, none of us know what's going to happen with this program as the federal government seems to be ratcheting down the requirements and the funding streams for any sort of eligibility. In August, we presented a rough draft. We released it to community stakeholders, including those members of the Housing Consortium. Members of my internal board saw those meeting results and issues. The document's gone through various upgrades and additions to the mapping and certainly to the appendices. And I want to thank Jackie Fox and her staff for making a number of amendments to that document. For all intents and purposes, the latest revisions to the document point out some stark realities for the county and the city. We document almost 44,000 housing units in Allen County. We documented the fact that nearly 45% of Lima households and 30% of Allen County households exist on less than $25,000 per annum. We saw an increase of 55% over 2000 data relative to those homeowners that were experiencing a housing burden greater than 30%. ACS data indicated a drop in the percentage of owner-occupied housing units. That was a problem. we saw drops of 14 to 34% in the percentage of owner-occupied housing units. And that reflected Lima, Spencerville, Delphus, Cairo, and Lafayette, largely the older housing stock. The quality of the housing stock, according to the auditor's database, rated fair and poor at about 1 out of every 5 homes. High-quality housing stock accounted for less than 2% of the total housing stock. Data suggested that almost 6,700 homes countywide pose some potential threat for lead-based paint poisoning. Nearly 1,800, or about 4.5% of all households, resided in mobile homes. Foreclosures, albeit declining, can be expected to continue. We saw heavy concentrations in census tracts 123, 113, and 130. Some of those tracts you're very familiar with. The report suggests that our zoning regulations are antiquated across the city and its villages and the counties. They needed to be upgraded to reflect declining populations, smaller household sizes, and increasing utility costs. The finance, insurance, and real estate industries need to do a better job of providing outreach and mentoring, especially in the minority and low-income communities. Increased education and outreach is needed in terms of support for fair housing choice. We saw hate crimes, fair housing violations, and some educational opportunities and enforcement seem to be warranted. We seem to need to support and, let's say, re-energize the presence of Metropolitan Housing Authority and New Lima. We don't have very strong housing development agencies locally. We need to prioritize some of that redevelopment activity, including new housing and weatherization services. HWAP out of Hancock County is distant, and there seems to be some question as to their involvement within Allen County itself. We learned of a release by HUD in July 2013 targeting environmental structures in CDBG-funded programs. Table 60 and that table on page J25 kind of give you a highlight of some of the environmental and structural issues that they're going to expect to see if we want to successfully compete for CDBG funding. HUD is targeting those neighborhoods who are experiencing poverty rates greater than 40%, and that have heavy minority concentrations, largely not white, primarily census tracts 125, 127, 129, 134, 136, 138, 137, 140. So basically the census tracts that we've come to identify with in terms of other socioeconomic and housing problems. HUD is looking for projects that will change both the environment and the structure, and they want to make sure that we use our CDBG dollars to target bigger issues. I think that what you're going to find is the old way of doing business is going to be gone. I think that using these funding for street paving, for minor improvements that are unconnected to the housing stock are going to be deemed ineligible under the new guidelines. Everybody's on edge. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. You've seen this document before. We presented this document a couple of years back in the same format. We've accentuated certain issues. We've added about 165 pages of appendices and supporting documentation, and we're bringing it up to both the city and to the county commissioners this week. We're hoping that you've had a chance to, to review this document. It's been online for since October, and we're trying to finalize it this year so that we can submit it successfully for the CDBG applications that are coming forward. If you've got any questions, Amy would be happy to answer them. Am I under my 3 minutes?
Close enough.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mazur.
Mr. President, I have one question. Mr. Mazur, what's your hours so I need to discuss a couple of things? I have you up there for an hour, and I know We got a lot to do, but I want to talk to you about this.
Typically, you can find me there any day between 8 and 5, sometimes earlier, sometimes later.
No lunch? Okay, yeah, I'll be getting with you on some of the
Okay,
things.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Thank you, Mr. Mazur. Reports of committees, Finance Committee from September 23rd and November 25th.
Mr. President, all council members have a copy of the minutes as submitted. I would move that these reports be received, filed, and approved.
Second.
The motion and the second is that the committee report for the Finance Committee from September 23rd and November 25th be received, filed, and approved. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Moving on to Resolution 1213.
Accepting the 2013 analysis of impediments to fair housing choice.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that resolution number 1213 be adopted on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to adopt Resolution 1213 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Resolution 1213 has been adopted on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 23013.
Amending the 2013 annual budget.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that ordinance 23013 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 23013 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 23013 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 23113.
Authorizing cash advances from the general fund to certain other funds and for reimbursement back to the general fund.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that ordinance 23113 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 23113 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 23113 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 23213.
Authorizing the transfer of cash between certain funds as herein described.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that ordinance 23213 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 23213 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 23213 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 23313.
Making preliminary appropriations for current and ordinary expenses of the City of Lima, Ohio for the period beginning January 1st, 2014 until the annual appropriation ordinance of the City of Lima is in force.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that ordinance 23313 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 23313 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 23313 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 23413.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Software Solutions, Inc.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that ordinance 23413 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 23413 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 23413 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 23513.
Authorizing the auditor to make payment to the State of Ohio Environmental Protection Agency.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that ordinance 23513 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 235-13 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 235-13 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 236-13.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Benz Construction, Inc. for demolition of residential structures during the 2014 calendar year.
Mr. President,
Mr. Nieper.
I move that ordinance number 236-13 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 236-13 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 236-13 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 237-13.
Authorizing the mayor to apply for, accept, receive, and administer an assistance to firefighters grant.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that ordinance 237-13 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 237-13 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 237-13 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 238-13.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Reineke Mazda and Nissan, Inc. for the purchase of a 2014 Ford Focus 4D sedan.
Mr. President,
Sedan.
Glenn.
A sedan.
4D.
I
Mr.
move,
Glenn.
That's
I move
4D.
that ordinance 238-13 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 238-13 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 238-13 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 239-13.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Reineke Mazda Nissan, Inc. for the purchase of a 2014 Ford Inceptor SUV.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that ordinance 239-13 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 239-13 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 239-13 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 240-13.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with the Lima City Schools Board of Education.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that ordinance 240-13 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 240-13 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 240-13 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 241-13.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with Frost Brown Todd.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that ordinance number 241-13 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 241-13 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 241-13 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 242-13.
Authorizing the mayor to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the renovation of the second floor of the Hall of Justice building.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that ordinance number 242-13 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 242-13 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend? Ms.
Yes,
Townsend?
I was.
Mr. Nixon?
Yeah.
We're having a meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Did you see him come in?
Yeah.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 24213 has been passed on its first reading with a little bit of excitement by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 24313.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract for the purchase of an land digital equipment.
Mr. President. What kind of, wait.
Mr. McLean.
I move that ordinance 243-13 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 24313 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 24313 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. 24413.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Spirion Inc. for contracted services for the 2014 calendar year.
Mr. President,
Ms. Townsend.
I move that ordinance 24413 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 24413 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
No.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
No.
Ordinance 24413 has been passed on its first reading by a 6-2 vote. Ordinance 24513.
To amend the contract with Ward Construction Company as authorized by ordinance 19112.
Mr. President,
Mr. Nieper.
I move that ordinance number 24513 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 24513 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 24513 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 24613.
Amending ordinance 15013.
Mr. President,
Mr. Nieper.
I move that ordinance number 24613 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
$13.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 24613 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 24613 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 24713.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into contracts with custom staffing for engineering and electrical inspection services.
Mr. President,
Ms. Townsend.
I move that ordinance 24713 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 24713 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
No.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes. Yes.
Ordinance 24713 has passed on its first reading by a 7-1 vote. Ordinance 24813.
Authorizing the mayor to enter to a contract with Patrick Staffing, Inc. for engineering technical services, technician services.
Mr. President.
Ms. Townsend.
I move that ordinance 24813 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 24813 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
No.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
No.
Ordinance 24813 has been passed on its first reading by a 6-2 vote. Ordinance 24913.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Richard Cottrell for certified building inspection services.
Mr. President,
Mr. Nieper.
I move that ordinance number 24913 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 24913 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
No.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 24913 has been passed on its first reading by a 7-1 vote. Ordinance 25013.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Ron Elliott for plan review services for the 2014 calendar year.
Mr. President,
Mr. Nieper.
I move that ordinance number 25013 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 25013 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 25013 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 25113.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with James Stedke for non-certified building inspection services.
Mr. President,
Mr. Nieper.
I move that ordinance number 25113 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 25113 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
No.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 25113 has been passed on its first reading by a 7-1 vote. Ordinance 25213.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a professional services agreement with MWH Americas, Inc.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that ordinance number 25213 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 25213 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Ordinance 25213 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0
Too much
vote.
talking tonight.
Miscellaneous business. Ms. Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. President. All the yields I've made over the past 16 years, I'm taking back right now.
Thank you, Ms. Townsend. Mr. Nieper.
There are many thank yous that I would like to make tonight, since any successes I may have had depended on the cooperation of others. I will start with the Westgate Neighborhood Association. They are an amazing group of people who have maintained an active association, and while sometimes not able to physically assist in some events, they have been avid supporters of the Neighborhood Cleanup Project, Toys for Tots, the Westgate Christmas Decoration Contest, and LACNIP and its activities, to name a few. The group has been represented by Arlie and Shirley Taylor, who have been faithful stalwarts at council meetings and at LACNIP events. Throughout my 16 years, I can honestly say that every issue where I needed the help of administrative department heads and/or their staff, I had their quick attention, and they often contacted the resident directly. Keeping in mind these were the primary departments with which I dealt, I want to thank Gary, Mike, Dave, Gina, and Luann in the utility department. They were all great at customer service. Howard and his staff were quick responders. Kirk Niemeyer held public meetings and withstood with dignity the slings and arrows of disgruntled citizens. Saul was always a quick responder, and Amy and her property maintenance crew were on the scene when called. Steve Cleaves has certainly put the city's finances on a solid base, and along with Gene and Randy, the improved processes that have brought improved audits every year. Without the advice and direction of the law director, my tenure on council would have been rife with blunders. Tony has patiently spent a lot of time listening to my frustrations and then providing suggestions and/or educating me toward a resolution. We have also shared some humor. Mayor Berger has served this community with integrity and true commitment. He has always worked hard, and a lot of what he has accomplished for the city of Lima through the years may never be understood publicly. Mayor Berger has always been a good listener, and his counsel always rational. We have also shared some humor. Through this journey of 16 years, the support of my family and friends has never wavered. I thank them for enduring discussions, of such riveting subject as sewers and sewer laterals, surface water and how to manage it, driving to the reservoir for a view, and helping with my garden, this has been years ago, at the wastewater treatment plant. If there is no positive support group close by, the journey loses its allure. Lima City Council Clerk Sally has been a good sounding board through the years and very helpful with understanding the process, providing reminders and explaining the rules. She really knows her stuff. And Lima City Council, throughout the years, Tom has been a very good process guy with his ability to understand an issue, reduce it to its lowest common denominator, and to find a resolution. Because of this ability, I admire Tom a lot and have told him so through the years. John, on the other hand, just kidding. John, I'm sure most of you know, has represented the 1st and 2nd wards. Since John was appointed as council president in 2007, I have seen him become someone who can be conciliatory when needed, but can also be direct when the occasion calls. John is able to identify the common ground from which solutions can be found. I thank Mr. Nixon for his service and his friendship. And to all of those who have served on council with me these 16 years, I thank all of you, past councilors and those sitting up here tonight, for your service. It is never easy to sit up here and make these decisions. City councilors and officials are after the same mission, I believe, to make the city of Lima a better place to live and work. The attitude of cooperation for businesses, for cooperation and collaboration should be used to create an environment for businesses and individuals to live positively in community. In 1998, council meetings often became animated, while councilors subjected administrators and staff to public humiliation and uncivil exchanges right here in this room. Unfortunately, I've seen some of the same methods of engagement happening today. To accomplish what I think we all want to accomplish, and that is having a role in bettering the city of Lima, I refer back to tonight's prayer. 3 items in the prayer. 1, we all need to grow in understanding of our own motives. 2, have insights that will help us be patient and kind as we talk. And 3, understand that real strength can always find compromise, so you can find common ground. It has been an honor and privilege to serve on Lima City Council representing the 7th Ward. I wish you all the best and the happiest of holidays. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought long and hard, as this is also my last meeting. I unfortunately, only serving one term, 4 years, I don't have near as much time that I've yielded through the years to take. Although it's just like my first 2 years, I had to follow David Adams and his poem every time, and I am not really that good at poetry, so, but, you know, Paige gives us this inspiring look back at the last 16 years of her service, and to Paige, I congratulate you on your retirement from council, and just want to keep short and give a few thank yous. I want to thank everyone, certainly here on council and in the administration. You know, in 4 years, there's been a lot of agreement. There's been a lot of disagreements. But at the end of the day, I look where we are today versus where the city was 4 years ago, and I know I certainly leave this building here tonight proud of what we've been able to accomplish and the footing, the solid footing that the city is on today. I want to thank the residents of the First Ward who voted voted for me 4 years ago and gave me this great opportunity to serve. It's been an educational experience. I've learned a lot, not just about the city of Lima and the government and things like that here, but just about life in general and the relationships that we take with us. Two special thank yous. I'd like to thank my wife and my employer, both of which have sacrificed my time, some during business hours, some at 2 or 3 in the morning. You pick which one was which time, but both of them, there are sacrifices that you make when you are in public service, and those two more than anyone else have felt that sacrifice with little or no return and did it willingly. I'm going to begin a new chapter of my life. I don't know if it's a secret, but I am running for the Ohio House of Representatives and looking to replace Representative Huffman there. Win or lose, I'm proud of my time here on council and feel it was time to move on and present some new challenges for myself. But I want to wish luck to Todd Gordon, who will be replacing me. I wish I had a cell phone number so I could give it to everyone out there, but he'll be here at the first meeting. And
You'll put him out there like
I'm
that.
on duty for 2.5 more weeks, 3 more weeks, and we'll be around and happy to have help you with anything you need over the holidays. So, thank you.
Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple of items again. We're losing 2 mighty fine voices in our council here tonight. They're going to be sadly missed. Both of them had a lot of words of wisdom to me, and I appreciate your efforts to set me on the right track many times and to help me understand some of the items that came up. I'm relative young on council compared to Mrs. Townsend and a little bit longer than you have, but our conversations have been good ones, and I appreciate it. And I'm going to miss both of you very much. So I also don't want to forget that we're going to lose our auditor. Gene's been with us since I've been on council, probably since you've been on council, probably before anyone. Oh,
Not quite.
Not quite that long.
I'm an old guy, buddy, you know?
You've done a great job. You've been an excellent asset to me because asking you questions, I've always got a very good answer, a very straight answer, whether I like to hear it or not. And I tell you, your department, it was very, very well run. I thank Randy for that too. But we're going to miss you. So whatever you plan on doing, I know you're not going to be a couch potato because you're too active for that, but you're probably going to find some warm weather somewhere, I'm sure. But you are going to be missed, and I'm going to miss you. So, and the only other thing I have tonight is the Northside Neighborhood Association will have its meeting tomorrow at 7 in the cafeteria at St. Gerard's. Have some punch and cookies if anyone wants to stop out, just a little Christmas thing. Won't last long, I promise. So 7 o'clock in the cafeteria at St. Gerard's. Again, thank you all for your service.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Lowe?
2 things. I would like to thank the administration for the security that they have started putting in place within the building. It's one of the first things that I mentioned when I came on council, and it feels good to see steps moving in the right direction. So I do want to thank the administration for that. And also at the last council, I mentioned the fact of a couple families that were in need of help. And I know he's probably going to kill me because he probably didn't want no recognition for this. But we do have some good men that work in this city. And I just want to publicly thank Mr. Caprella for his donation. And I know he's going to kill me, but I tell you what, he listened, and it helped. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, Mike, thank you. Appreciate, and it's going to help them kids have a better day. Thank you. That's it, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Mr. Tevin?
Paige, I am going to miss you on council. You and I have worked on a lot of different issues together, and I have always appreciated your interest, the conversation back and forth, your perspective on different issues, and your dedication to the city. And you're filling some big shoes. Is Ann still out there? I saw she was there sitting there earlier. But Ann has big shoes to fill, and I'm sure she will do a fine job. I want you to know how much I value, Paige, you as a peer on city council and your friendship. So thank you very much, and you should be nothing but proud of what you've accomplished with your service to the city. Kurt, you and I had some rough times early on. I think we reached a point where, because a lot of what city council deals with is routine in nature, but there are a few issues that come up that do become contentious. And when when hard positions are taken, it can take a while to find common ground. I think we learned how to communicate with each other and deal with each other, and I appreciate the passion for what you do and the time and effort you put into it, and the work on the finance committee. Being a public official is not easy. It's tough. We have a lot of bosses, and everybody wants to hear what they want to hear, and sometimes you have to tell them no, and I know that you've done that along with all other council members when need be. But I do appreciate and thank you for your service to the community. Gene, I'm going to miss you. You are leaving the city and your responsibilities relative to the city government in very good shape and in good hands. So thank you very much. And if you look at the example that is being left for those filling these spots, it's good to know that if people have been paying attention, they will have an idea of how to proceed, and they will understand that they can ask questions and get help from any one of us. So thank you very much. And lastly, I would like to wish everyone a happy holiday. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tevin. Ms. Adams?
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, would like to join in thanking Councilor Nieper, Councilor Townsend for their service. A lot of things have been said I don't want to repeat, but thank you very much for conversations, answering calls, and agreeing to disagree sometimes. And we work together. I appreciate the time these past 4 years working with both of you. I also would like to thank Gene for being there, taking the calls, answering questions and concerns, educating me on some issues and financing and auditing. And thank you for leading the city in the state that it's in as well, and the oversee that you've put towards that position. Thank you. I'd like to request an issue be referred to the Traffic Commission to study the light at Kibbe and Calumet from its current operation. It's activated by the traffic to a timer sequence.
Second, you want me?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
You're looking for you're looking for the operation to be reviewed?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Motion, the second, is to refer to the Traffic Commission a review of the traffic signal at Kibbe and Calumet from its current status of operation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries.
Thank you. I'd like to announce a Midway East meeting this Thursday, December 19th at 7 p.m. at 727 East Kibbe Street. It was made mention in pre-council to publicly mention about shoveling sidewalks. That should occur 4 hours after the snowfall has stopped. And please, been out a couple times already, and looks like we'll be out again tomorrow. But get out there and shovel your sidewalks to allow pedestrian traffic to and from their destination, especially the children going to and from school. And I too would like to wish everyone a happy holiday, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Mr. Glenn?
Yeah, I got a couple things. First of all, I want to thank Public Works and Mr. Beebe and for the work they've done this past weekend. Appreciate him taking us a couple calls there, and they got right on it. And we should commend our Public Works. And being a small city like Lima, what kind of good work we get done compared to some cities don't have that opportunity. And I sit up in here, Saul brought out a good report here, what we got to do, what kind of money we got to spend. And that's a lot of money. And for us to have that, we had to make sure our financial committee and everyone had to make sure that we got this opportunity to keep our city on good ground. So I appreciate that so much. Also, I want to appreciate our Safety Service Committee. I got a lot of good calls on Paige and Ms. Adams on our committee that they did a really good job on, and Chief Martin, that we worked out the deal with the bar owners. I didn't have my report tonight, forgot it at home, but they appreciate that, and how we worked it out, and how the relationship gonna come. And with these two committee members, Paige and Ms. Adams, they brought up some good ideas, and we got it all aired out, and one guy said he owned a bar in another city. He said, man, we've never got that all. We've never been able to sit in city council and speak out, and hear how we're going to have a better relationship on our license, renewing our license. And also our president of city council came, and Mr. Lowe. But we appreciate that. He said he appreciate how we went about it. So thank you for that. On Tuesday, tomorrow, we got a meeting. Paige ain't done yet. She got one more meeting at 5:30. We're going to be talking about the meters, also the pump gun, and that's going to be at 5:30. No matter what the weather is, we're going to try to get that done. That's been on the docket for a while, so we'll get that done there. So them are the two things we're going to do. Paige, I said a lot of things about you, how you still carry that legacy on your job, and it goes as the council lady, and how many people help. You help so many people, and from all of, not just my ward, everybody in the city. And when you get to hear people from out of town talk about your work you do, you send a good seed. You got a good heart, and you take your job very serious. And you're working on your other job and this job here. So, and I hope you continue. I know you have a time you're going to retire from LACA, but I hope you get to continue working with the young people. Because when they say good things like that, I'm telling you, I feel so good when I'm out of town hearing about another city council person. That's great. I put the S on my chest and feel good about it, and that's great.
Thank you, dear.
And Mr. Reeman, you're excellent. I mean, ever since I've been on council, nothing but good stuff. If you see out in the public, you're going to speak. Not because I'm LCC Thunderbird. You're going to speak no matter what. And I feel good about that. And I feel real good about that when, no matter what, you come up there and talk to you, you're going to lay it out in a very, very nice way. You remind me of Mike Capella. And Mike, I'm not retiring Mike out so quick, but I'm just saying.
Must be the hair.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, you guys, I mean, Mike gonna keep humor, and you always gonna have, you always have something good to say. I mean, like you said, you're gonna give you the right thing, you're gonna let them know. And when you walk out your office, you feel confidence that you got the right answer when it comes from you. So I appreciate that. You're gonna be really missed on that. And I know we got another person coming in there, he should do the same thing. He came up under you, so the seed gonna be planted good. Also, Nieper, and I know me and Nieper have me and Nieper talk so much about different things, how he helped you. You're a young guy on the council, now you're finna take some big shoes there, but, you've been great. You've been great for that ward, you represent that ward real good, excellent. So you remind me of little Derry Glenn, Yeah, So,
Give me if that doesn't make it on my
yeah, I didn't get that one.
favorite postcards.
Don't talk. I got you, Neeper, so you can't come back.
That's your campaign slogan.
That will not be heard in the next
But,
campaign.
Good luck. Good luck what you're doing. Tomorrow night, weather permitting, we got a big meeting with all the teachers at 3:30 at Liberty School. I'm doing that route around, talk to the parents, we talking to the teacher. We will have the representatives there. I don't know, both of them gonna be there. I know Neeper said he will be there tomorrow night to hear what the teacher's gonna say. Mr. Cup might not be there. He might not be there, so, but we're gonna make sure we gave them both both of them to come out to that and hear the teachers out. That anybody want to come out, except the parents, because we already had a meeting with the parents. So the next meeting I will have with the administration. So this is something we are doing, to trying to figure out what we can do to help our school out, help find a solution. And we hope we can get that solution. And we got a lot of good things going on there. But everybody have a Merry Christmas. Help someone out. Help someone out. We know this is the day of giving, and I know we got a lot of good things going on. We got breakfast Santa Claus and Salvation Army passing out toys. So no kid should go without a car or a toy. No people should go without food this Christmas. So let's make sure we take someone in. Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. I just have a couple of things. Number one, I looked over the list of ordinances that have been passed over time. And I just want to, thank Kurt, Little Glenn Niebuhr.
Baby D.
Baby D.
Baby D.
Baby D.
That's a good campaign slogan.
Seriously, Kurt, thank you for your service on council. As I know we talked once before you were elected during the campaign season, it's a lot of work. I think it is probably, I'll still contend that serving on Lima City Council or on any city council is probably the best civics lesson you can ever have.
Absolutely.
And I certainly wish you the best in your future endeavors. Since you're, according to Tony's numbers, since the beginning of your term, you've been involved in 1,081 ordinances.
Wow.
So I want to thank you for your service and again wish you the best. Mr. Riemann, I want to thank you for lots of things. When I first came on council, Gene Riemann ran a pharmacy up on the corner at High Street. And I would run into him occasionally at Joey's, in the back room. And back then, I was pre-gray hair and often sometimes looked at as some young pup. But Gene never looked at us that way. Gene always listened, gave ideas, respected the generational differences, respected, and always gave us good ideas, as well as, to tie into what we were thinking. Gene, that kind of friendship means the world to me. And I know that there were other council people who were new, coming on around that time. And I know that a lot of times there's a generational difference, and you kind of looked at it, like I said, you looked at it as a young pup that doesn't understand anything, but it was never that way with you. You were one of those guys who was always encouraging, tried to get us to look outside the box, but always respected the decisions that were made in the end. That kind of support and friendship has meant the world to me. You came into the auditor's office in somewhat of a tough time. Changes were taking place in the government laws and regulations as to how municipalities did their accounting. You kind of came into that, and they started changing all the rules. You muddled through that, fought through it, got us through it. There was a time when the books of the city of Lima were rendered inauditable by the state auditor, and Frankly, I think that was more of a political shot than a realistic shot, but nonetheless, since that time, you took the bull by the horns, you and your department, and we have had nearly flawless audits since that time. That is a real testament to your ethic, to your work ethic, to your character, and to your tenacity in making that happen. I want to thank you for that, Chief. Okay? Ms. Townsend, 16 years. Your service to this community, however, goes long before your tenure on City Council. As a teacher and an educator, you've touched the lives of thousands. As an employee of ALACA, you've touched the lives of thousands. As a board member at the Met Housing, you've affected the lives of thousands more. And as a counselor, you've affected a lot of lives. I'm going to miss the phone calls. John, we got to talk. But I always knew that it was going to be a good conversation. We were going to have an exchange of ideas. We would work through issues and try to come to solutions that everyone could live with. Your friendship, your work ethic, you're a wonderful lady, and I'm glad to call you a friend and a coworker. 3,816 ordinances. That's a lot. And it takes a lot of patience, especially with everything else that you know, your other work that you had going on. I think this past year, when did you retire from LACA last year?
It'll be 2 years.
2 years ago? Okay. Probably have been the, I guess, the less demanding of your time years in your entire life. I wish you a very good and happy retirement. I hope that you'll be able to play lots of golf. Please do not call us during council meetings to say that you're in Hawaii, okay? I can't say enough kind things about you. I just know that you're appreciated and loved.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much.
I guess that's all I have. Wish everybody a Merry Christmas. We do have executive session this
Mr.
evening.
President,
Mr. Tebben?
before I make that motion, I'd be very remiss if I didn't welcome the newest members to the Fourth Ward as of the 1st of January, Mr. and Mrs. Nieper. So, you know how to get a hold of me, Kurt.
Mr. Tebben, I have been informed by the law director that that will be the 6th of January
Oh,
at
okay.
approximately 7:05 p.m.
All right.
All right, don't be moving.
Thank you, Tony.
Mr. Nixon,
Mr. Raymond?
I would just like to make comments. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for their kind comments. 16 years ago, Paige, and when I came, I never thought I'd be here for 16 years. But I can truly say that I've enjoyed every day of it. It's really been a good experience. When I got rid of the drugstore, I did think that I had something to offer, and how could I use that knowledge that I had. And I think I did it in the best way that I knew how to do it, and that was run and become the auditor. Paige, we sat through 384 council meetings, or most of those anyway, and the number of ordinances that you talked about. I would like to thank the administration staff, Mayor Berger, Tony, and all of the people on council who have helped us when we needed help to do what we needed to do and made our jobs a lot easier. So
thank you all, and I think Randy will be an added value to the position when he becomes the auditor. So again, thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Reed.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin?
I move that Lima City Council adjourn into executive session for purposes of discussing real estate.
Second.
The motion, the second, is that Lima City Council will adjourn into executive session for the purposes of discussing real estate. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Ms. Townsend?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes?
Mr. Nieper.
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
And Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
The motion is unanimous, and we will adjourn into executive session.